So this new assignment is called Tunnel Paintings, and we are basing it off of a memory. So this is going to be your new watercolor assignment that we're going to be working on for the next few weeks. So the big ideas or the objective of this assignment is to communicate a memory through art. So we're going to create a tunnel book illustration with watercolor and create atmospheric perspective through the use of tunnel book pages. So think of a poignant memory. This could be a snapshot of a memory, not something long and detailed. If you can't think of a specific memory that you would like to draw out or paint out, you can also use a scene from a children's book. Try to think of the book and not the movie because we want to be creative in our own way here. So a tunnel book, they're made up of a series of pages that are held together by folded strips of paper on the side. Think of like an accordion. And they create the illusion of depth and perspective because we're actually using different layers to create that background, middle ground, and foreground. So it's almost like a sculpture in a way as well because it's three-dimensional. So these are some tunnel books by artist Andrea Dezzo to give you an idea of what these look like. So we can actually see that these stick above, so we can see that they are actually standing out from the rest. Here's another one. And she does actually light up hers, but we are not going to be adding lights to ours. Some angry bees coming at you. And this one as well I love. So again, all of these layers are created by having different pages cut out. So that's what we're going to attempt with this project. Okay, first things first, you are going to use your watercolor paper. You should have 12 of them in your kit, and at this point you've already used a few of them for the practice. All you need for this assignment is 5, so I want you to take out 5 of your watercolor papers, and they are going to already be at the size 8 by 10 roughly. We're just going to stick at whatever size they're at. So although here it says 4, we're going to be cutting out 4 of them into our actual design, but I want 1 left over to be used as a picture frame. So you will be using 5. And don't worry about stretching your paper. If you're using a certain quality of watercolor paper, what you actually do is you give it a bath. I know that sounds funny. You soak the paper and then you end up stretching it and you staple it to a board, and that's just because if we've ever worked with paper before and got it wet, we notice that it crumples, or it's called buckling when the paper gets all warped. So that's why you do stretch a paper, but we're not going to do that this time around just because we don't have the supplies at home. One way to prevent the buckling is that we just need to make sure when we're painting, we don't want to have a ton of water on our page. That's what gets it to warp. And then we're going to have 2 pieces of paper, and I'm going to show you my example of this in a little bit. And you're going to have an 8 by 5 piece of paper, and this can just be printer paper or your paper from your sketchbook. It doesn't have to be thick paper. And we're going to end up folding it so that we have 2 M shapes here. And these are going to be what hold the sides together. We're actually going to split our layers into these folds, and that's what is going to hold it in place. So 5 pieces of paper and 2 blank papers to create an accordion. All right, next we're going to create this little accordion, and that is going to be what puts all of these papers together and is what holds them put. So in the end, it should look like this, and it looks like an M and then another M. So we're having a 2M fold. So what I did for this one, it says that it needs to be 8 inches by 5 inches. So if you are doing that with a ruler, we know that 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters times 8 inches. So we're going to have a width of 20 centimeters. And then we have 5 inches, so 12.5. Alright, now you would cut this. I don't have scissors on me, so I'm just going to fold it nicely and rip it. Could have been better. Okay, again, that's why I use scissors, so it's nice and tidy. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fold this over again once more to go the opposite way, but in order to create this, first I'm just going to fold it in half because I want to make sure that I get nice even folds. And then once I have folded that in half,
I'm going to keep folding in half until I get this. So if you're looking at this, I have 1, 2, 3 pockets, or 1, 2, 3, 4 pockets. So I'm going to fold this way. And I'm going to fold, now that I have a quarter, I'm going to fold that again. And then I'm flipping it the other way to fold now. Okay, so I got 1M so far. And now I have 2 M's. So there we go. I have my accordion sides ready. Now you'll notice that these don't fit. My paper is a little bit bigger than 8 by 10, whereas the height of these were 8. So what you want to do is either just double check your measurements, make sure your paper is either 8 by 10, or all you have to do is just make these taller. So if your paper is actually 9 inches, just make the height of these 9 so that they line all the way up. So that was just my mistake.
Okay, so these are not my words. So the person who created this project, this is their artwork. So the memory they chose is from their childhood in southern Indiana. They used to hide in a honeysuckle bush with their best friend Kim. They would sit there for what seemed like hours just eating honeysuckle on a hot summer day. So that's what their artwork is going to be about. That is their memory. So first, they have their thumbnail sketch, and although we're going to be dividing our paper into layers, it's actually a good idea to draw the entire scene first, and then we can figure out if we have enough objects in or enough details in that to actually create our own layers. So for them, we want to have 4 layers. We're going to have our background, our third layer, our second layer, and our front ground. So it's as if we have a background, 2 middle grounds, and a foreground.
So here is my rough copy, and this is what you will be sending to me in Edbeat. So first off, I had a brainstorm. I had 4 different ones of different memories I could create. So first off, every summer, my dad and my sister and myself go to Algonquin. We rent a cottage, and there's a nice dock, and we can kayak, and there's some nice hills behind it. So that's one idea. I also created a little sketch of myself when I go kayaking at the Pinery in Grand Bend and the river that goes down there. I had an idea of when I visited England. I wanted to have some maybe castles in there and a phone booth. And then finally, I did one for a children's book. I did Percy Jackson and the Olympians. That was my favorite book when I was a kid. And I have a scene where he's fighting a Hydra. And because a Hydra has a bunch of different heads, I figured I could do 4 different layers with so many different heads coming in from each angle that would kind of overlap and seem overwhelming, with him in the middle and the body of the Hydra being the background. So I actually really like this idea. I think I might do this one in the future. But for today, I have chosen to do my Algonquin trip. So what I'm going to do for this one is my background. I have my scene here drawn to completion, but I need to break it down into what all 4 layers are going to look like. If it's easier for you to think of it that way, you can just all draw 4, but I really, really encourage you to do what the picture is going to look like first and then break it down.
All right, next what we're going to do is on each of our watercolor papers, we're going to add a 1-inch border, and this is for 2 reasons. First, because we need something to attach to the accordion siding. Also because when we are working with watercolor, we are going to tape down our edges. So get out your ruler and measure 1 inch around the border. If your ruler is not in inches, this is pretty much 2.5 centimeters. So just make the border consistent.
Alright, so we are going to measure the border of these papers. So again, it's going to be 1 inch, or that is roughly 2.5 centimeters. So I'm just going to get my pencil and line that up, make a tick. And you're doing this to all of your papers. Make sure to hold your ruler straight so it doesn't get all wonky and go diagonally. So again, 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters. Just make sure it's consistent all the way around. Alright, so I have my 4 layers I now have drawn like that. And again, you're going to do 4 layers, but I'm going to have 1 layer that is just going to be a border around the final image. So what I'm going to do for that one is, I even may make it just slightly larger, I guess an extra centimeter maybe. So I'm going to do 1 final border that is 3 centimeters. And that is just so that I have a little bit of an overlap and I have a nice clean edge. Obviously I'm going to cut this out, but I would flip this around and use the back just because my border is going over a little bit. Again, this is going to be my border, so it should be nice and clean, so it should be the nicest page. So again, 3 centimeters all the way around. Now I'm even going to label this border so that I know which layer is which. Just so I don't draw on that one, because we wouldn't want any borders to stick out more than the others. And because I'm using the back of this, it is no big deal. Alright, so I have done that to all 5 sheets. Again, I'm going to put my border one off to the side. I really don't need that anytime soon. And I am ready to go.
Next up, in pencil, lightly sketch your scenes onto your watercolor paper. And again, this is, you should already have done a rough copy of this. This is each layer. So with your watercolor paper, it is prone to indents, and that is a watercolor technique called sgraffito, which you saw in the video. So just make sure that you are keeping that pencil marking as light as possible. When you see my example, I am drawing a little bit darker just so that it's picked up on the camera.
Okay, so I started with my foreground because that's going to be the main focal point. However, I really want to make sure that I'm lining everything up. So when I'm looking at where I'm going to draw the kayakers and the pineapple, and then also the mountain range, I would probably want to have these side by side and measure. So if I want my water to end here, actually I'm going to go a little bit higher. So maybe I'm going to, this part's going to be hidden, so maybe I'm going to put like a tick here. That's where my water is going to be, and then maybe my mountains come about here. So make sure that you're referencing both pictures. I'm sorry, that's hard to see in the camera. Make sure that you're referencing both pictures completely through the progress, because when the negative space is cut out, we need to make sure that we can still see what's on the next page. So make sure you're doing that in relationship to each other.
Trace over your sketches with waterproof ink. So this is my favorite type of medium. I do a lot of marker and watercolor. What I want you to do first, because we might not have the materials that we need for this, there are certain pens that don't bleed. I want you to practice this on a piece of paper first in your sketchbook or on the test pages from your watercolor paper. Please get that thin Sharpie that you have in your art kit, and I want you to draw a line, and I want you to draw another line. One of those lines I want you to add watercolor to right away. The other line I want you to let it dry for maybe 10-15 minutes and then add watercolor. What I want you to do with this experiment is you just want to see if that Sharpie does bleed, because if that marker bleeds when you add water on top of it, we don't want that. That's going to ruin our paint. If your marker does bleed, what I want you to do is you're going to use the marker after you paint. So it's going to be like a finishing touch. Because this is a book, it's a little bit more stylized, we will have those outlines on our drawing.
Okay, so before we start painting, we want to make sure that our setup is good to go. So I have my cup of water. If you're using a lot of dark colors, make sure you change it often. I have paper towels handy for when I do make a mistake. It is watercolor. We will make lots of mistakes, and that's okay. I have the brushes that I'm going to use. Now, I know in your kit you only got one brush. That's okay. You have your Sharpie or your pen that you've already tested out to figure out if you're doing pen first or after. And I have a different set of paints than you guys. I have my own personal ones that I've brought in, but have your palette ready as well. Remember, when you're working with your paint palette, let's say this was your paint palette and these are where your colors are, and this is the lid. You're going to add water to the paint and bring it over into the side of the palette. That's because we don't want to mix our colors together. That'll ruin the paint. And also we can add more water there if we need to. So make sure you're rinsing your brush between different colors. You don't want to mess up the original colors. I'm working on a project, so I just brought this from home, so that's why it's a little dirty and half used right now. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm using a different type of marker. If you are someone who really likes to paint, I recommend these brands for watercolor because they don't bleed. Even after I go over all my outlines, I'm still going to let it dry for a little bit first, so before I use. So for these ones here, I'm going to do like a willow tree type effect. And that's something that I don't really want to plan. I'm just going to go more for brushstroke right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the vine that's hanging down and then freehand the leaves with the paint, and then maybe I'll go in after and do some more detail. I want to put some in front of the branch and some behind. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and erase all these leaves because I'm going to freehand them in, and I don't really want the pencil to be behind it. There you go. So that's the outline for the first drawing, and then I start painting.
Then you are going to paint your scenes using watercolor. I'm going to do a sped up version of this so you can see it because we've already learned the techniques.
So we want to make sure that our paint is watery enough that it'll spread, but we don't want to have too much water in it so our paper will buckle. That's just what you're going to have to work on when you are doing that experimenting. So I like to keep the first layers a little bit more watery so that the paint isn't too vibrant, and I'm just going to go in with those layers. You do have to work quicker because as it dries you'll be able to see the outlines, and we're going to build up those layers after it dries. So the one issue you may have when you're doing this, and every time I wash my brush I kind of just dry it off on the paper towel so I can see that all the paint has come off it. You're going to have to work on all 4 paintings at the same time because you want layers of watercolor to dry before adding others, depending on the technique. So if I want to add shadows, that's something I could do when it was still wet, but if I want them to be precise shadows, I need to let it dry. So what I recommend is having a few different boards or have a few of your papers taped to the desk so you can kind of rotate between them, let one dry, work on the next one, let that dry, work on the next one. It's really a game of back and forth. Because I just painted my t-shirt, if I paint my hair and it's still wet, because the colors are going to touch, the hair may bleed into the t-shirt, so I'm not going to do anything more on myself for now. Maybe I'm going to go in and paint the dog. With watercolor it's easier to add darkness. It's harder to go lighter after. If you ever make a mistake, and get paint where you don't want it, clean off your brush. I went outside the line a little bit and add more water to it. That'll dilute it. And then I'm going to rip off a piece of paper towel and try to get as much of it up. What I would suggest is if you have a large area to cover like I do for this dock, I want you to mix a little bit more paint than you need to. It's better to make more paint than not enough, because once you make that paint and if you run out, it's going to be very hard to actually color match it. And so already I can see that my paper is buckling. It's lifting off. So we just have to make sure that we're trying to keep it as flat as possible. Afterwards, when I'm done painting, I may even put it under some books just to flatten it out.
Okay, now here is where it might be tricky, because I don't assume all of you have X-Acto knives at home. You can use scissors with this, you just want to be a little bit more careful. At this stage, I would also say, make sure that you do all the cutting afterwards, because if we have a really thin line like this and we cut first and then we added the watercolor paint, it may actually like rip or break away. So make sure that we're cutting after we paint. So if you are using an X-Acto knife, I have some safety rules that I'll show you in the video. Always cut away from your body and make sure that you have a mat or something underneath it. If you are using scissors, what you want to do is you want to poke a hole in an area first where there's the negative space, and that'll allow you to kind of move around a little bit more. Don't try to cut out just one big section, it'll just be really tricky, so cut out small sections at a time. Again, an X-Acto knife would be a lot easier. However, if your parents aren't comfortable with you using a knife, or if you just don't have one, use scissors and that's okay.
Alright, when you are done painting, you are going to cut out the negative space. Now, I suggest you wait until this is all dry, and I would even maybe put a book on top of this, make sure it's flattened out. When you are cutting, if you are using an X-Acto knife, obviously that is a blade. It is very sharp. Whenever we are cutting something, just some safety training right now, we are always cutting away from ourselves. We are never cutting towards our bodies. So if I was holding a piece down, I would be cutting, I have the risk of cutting my finger here. We're always cutting away from our body. Okay, when I do this, I just want to go nice and slow. You're probably not going to be able to cut everything out in one go. Don't try for that, but just really take your time. Again, if you don't have an X-Acto knife and you're using scissors, I would poke a hole in here where there's a lot of negative space, and then I would take the time to go around the edges and cut out little bits at a time. Still very, very manageable with scissors. The only part that you'll have struggles with is if there's like a smaller area in here. But other than that, you should be okay. So when you're cutting, make sure whatever is underneath is not going to be damaged, like a scrap piece of wood or a tray or cutting board. Don't do it on your kitchen table because the knife will leave indents, and I don't think your family will be very happy with you. Okay, so I'm just cutting out little sections at a time. When you're cutting, leave a little bit of space. You don't have to go directly towards the line. That gives us more of the paper cutout feel anyways. So don't feel like you have to go all the way to your drawing outline, because you actually may cut off some detail.
Make sure the frame of your artwork stays intact, so you're going to connect your art to at least 3 edges of the frame. So what that means here in the drawing is that this leaf is connected 1, 2, 3, 4 points of contact, and this is just so that it stays sturdy and it's not like moving around. If it's not connected at all, I'm not sure how it's going to stay in the artwork. So when that's part of your designing too, when you're working on your rough copies, make sure that the edges are touching. So in this particular scene, you'll see that although they wanted their things to float, they still had to add in a few extra lines just so that it was connected to stay sturdy. Because you're cutting around the negative space, it wouldn't make sense for something to be floating, so you may have to add these support lines in just in case, even if they don't go the best with your painting. There we go. There's another example. So we got 1, 2, 3 points of contact for this large drawing. And you'll notice for these little lines too, they didn't cut right to the edge, they gave it a little bit of extra room, and it's more of just a style thing as well. Alright, here's what theirs looks like once they put their scenes together. Okay, so they had 4 scenes, the background, the girl in blue, the girl in red, and the large honeysuckle. So here are their 2 pieces of paper that each have 7 folds, and that's so that they have 4 spots for their paintings to go. I'm going to do ours a little bit differently. So at this stage you will want either a hot glue gun or a glue stick. I would say maybe try to stay away from white glue, just because it may warp the page a little bit more. But if that's all you have, that's all you have. Work with what you've got. We're going to start from the back and move forward. I'll show you the demo of that.
Alright, so now all of our panels are done and we have to assemble it. So we have these, and remember, mine isn't lined up because my paper isn't actually 8 by 10. I went with whatever size it was, so just make sure that these are the same height as your paper. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to start with the back and move forward. So if this is my M and mine's gotten a little tattered, I just took it apart, I'm going to put glue on the seam here. And if I have a glue stick, you may as well double glue it to help stick better. And I'm going to put some glue on the back here, and I'm going to stick it in there. Now, this is an accordion, so I can just crunch it down, lay it flat, really put some pressure on it, and give it a few minutes. And I can do that on this side as well. So I'm going to glue it, stick it in that first indent. Ooh, it's being tricky right now. And so on. If you find that your paper was warped just from a lot of water, you can always put all the layers underneath a few heavy books for a few hours or overnight, and that'll help flatten them out a little bit. So glue, wait for that to dry, give it a few minutes. Same thing, so I'm going to kind of peel this back, add my other layer of glue here, layer to the back of my next layer, and apply. Just like that, so we're doing that on both sides again. Press it down, give it a few minutes, let it dry. Fold this next flap over. Glue, glue the back layer of this. Apply. One more then. Glue, next layer, apply. And then we're gonna have 1 fold left over, and that's why we did our border, because I actually messed up on my border here. A few of my borders, they got a little bit dirty, so we wanna make sure that this part is clean on all of our layers, as clean as possible at least. And then we're gonna get our border, and we are just gonna glue that right to the front. So again, last bit of glue there, and we'll have a nice clean book. So that was the demo. I'm gonna do mine a little bit different because I wanna make sure it's sturdy enough for years to use this as an example. So
that is our project. So let's take a look at some student examples. So for this one, this was a thumbnail sketch for building a treehouse. So at that stage, you'd be sending me your work. So they're sketching out the scene first. This is them putting it together. So this was their background, and the background will not have anything cut out. Second layer, which is their grass. Third and fourth layer. So the third layer included a tree, and the fourth layer were some more bushes in the foreground. And here it is all together. This was an Alice in Wonderland theme. So here's their sketches. A few of their copies. And their final artwork. One more, this was a memory of Peter Pan, so this was their background. Second layer, third layer, and fourth layer. And their final artwork. So although most of this is watercolor, I also will allow you, if you want to do any of those fine details using pencil or colored pencil, you can go ahead, but make sure the majority of this is done in watercolor. Here's another one, driving home from gymnastics, so we can see the car in the dark. We got that sky as the background. This one was gardening with mom. This one was swimming in Hawaii. I think this one is a little bit simpler. I would try to add a little bit more detail than this one, but not a bad start. Swinging in the playground. So again, your requirements are a detailed thumbnails for your book. You should be sending me your brainstorm and a breakdown of what each layer is going to look like. So a thumbnail sketch is just a small sketch. And send those to me in EDSB. You are creating a tunnel book that represents a snapshot of a memory or a memory of a child's book. There were a minimum of 4 layers. You can absolutely do more layers if you want. You have tons of watercolor paper, so go for it. The more you do, you'll just have to adjust the accordion paper on the side. Your illustration was detailed and effectively communicated the story or idea, so when I see it, I should be able to understand basically what the memory is. You created the illusion of depth and perspective. And finally, the craftsmanship, so you have the panel secured, your cuts, whether it's with a scissor or an X-Acto knife, they are clean and it's well put together. I'm so excited to see how these turn out.